Hey everybody, so looking ahead to March of this year, this might be one of those historic months for video game releases. We've got some big ones, and it got me wondering, is this one of the biggest months ever for video game releases? Well, it's hard to say for sure, as, opinions are going to vary on what's a big release, and it's hard to kind of keep track of which months had which games, going back looking through the years. I did look up, however, one notable year was 2004, and check this out, it had Half-Life 2, World of Warcraft, Metroid Prime 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, EverQuest 2, and Halo 2, and that was in November of 2004. That's pretty notable. Here's the big difference though, that was in November, which is a holiday month, so you typically see a bunch of big releases crammed into that time. This is March, and this is actually a trend I've noticed with this generation. I think a lot of it has to do with how long these games take to make. So what we see is a lot of delays, and so games get pushed out of that holiday period into early part of the next year, even as late as spring or summer in some cases. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of these big games, and I'm going to give my thoughts on them. Okay, the first game we're talking about is Doom Eternal, which is the sequel to 2016's Doom. So we have a sequel to a reboot. But a lot of people are excited for this game because that game was just awesome. I mean, so many people loved it. It was kind of a surprise too. I remember they wouldn't let reviewers post their reviews until like way later than is normal. So that's usually a red flag, because the reason why that's done is usually because they know the game sucks, and so they don't want people to see the bad review scores before they go to buy the game. But anyways, it ended up actually being good, so that was a surprise. Not to mention, the Doom franchise, they hadn't really done anything that great with it for, a number of years. So that was really cool, and the franchise looks to be back on track. And this new game looks to do everything that the 2016 game did, but even better, just ramping up everything and making everything more awesome. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one. Okay, next game on the list is Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Now, this is a sequel to the Ori and the Blind Forest game, which I'm a fan of. I played it all the way through, and what really sticks out about these games is the art style. I think these games are a great example of visual artistry in games. They look great. And, a lot of people call these games Metroidvania games, but in a lot of ways they're really not, because they kind of are on a fixed path. The game constantly says, okay, you're here, now you need to go here. And then you just go through there. So it's kind of under a guise of a Metroidvania, but it's really not. It's a pretty linear game in my opinion. But with that said, I don't mind that at all. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it allows them to design the challenge of where you're going to be going next very well. The control feels pretty good. It's also a challenging game that turns some people off, but if you play retro games like I do, and I know a lot of my viewers play retro games, and so I think you'll be right at home with it. Okay, next game on the list is Half-Life Alyx. Now, I know a lot of you might be thinking, why are we talking about a VR game? Well, and I don't know if people would consider this to be Half-Life 3 or not, but it's just really interesting to see what they're going to do with this. I actually don't know too much about this myself. I don't play VR games, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this one. Alright, next up we've got maybe the biggest of them all, which is the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, it's not the full game because they are splitting it up into parts, but this is huge because people were asking for the remake for years and years. Then they announced the remake, and now we've been waiting for the remake to actually come out for years and years. So, something I thought of that's kind of interesting, and I'd like to ask you guys what you think. Which is, do you think there was more hype for the original Final Fantasy VII or for this one? I'm sure that this remake will outsell it just because the video game industry is a lot bigger now than it used to be. But in terms of just the hype alone, I'd be curious what you guys think. I'm looking forward to playing it myself. I'm not as big of a fan of the original as most people are. That being said, I do think it is a good game. I enjoyed it. But yeah, really interested to see how this remake turns out, and this is going to be one of those huge things that gamers talk about, so I'm looking forward to it. Okay, next up we've got Neo 2, which is obviously the follow-up to the original Neo, which came out a handful of years ago, and it seems to generally be considered like one of the best games that copies Dark Souls. And I'm a bigger fan of the Dark Souls games myself, and you know, stuff like Bloodborne, Sekiro, stuff like that. But with that said, I have no problem with playing a different game that copies Dark Souls if it's good. I didn't like Neo very much though. I know that people do, and if you like it, let me know. I'd be interested to know how you think it compares to Dark Souls. But I'm curious to see what Neo 2 does, because the original Neo was in development for a long time, and I just want to see what they do with a game that was developed from the ground up for the current generation. I think it'll be good, and I'm looking forward to giving it a chance. Okay, next game on the list is Animal Crossing, which I have never played any of the Animal Crossing games. I'm very familiar with what they are, and I know that it's a big IP for Nintendo, and so I'm happy for Nintendo to be having a big release for everybody, because a lot of these games I've mentioned today are not coming out for the Switch, so you know, that's kind of a bummer, but at least they'll have Animal Crossing, and a lot of Nintendo fans will be happy with that. This is actually one that I think some of you watching might know more than me, and so I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about it down in the comments. Okay, next game I'm talking about is actually a game that comes out in April, but it's very early in April, and I feel like I should mention it, and that would be Resident Evil 3. And actually, the release date got announced pretty recently for this one, so I wonder if they pushed it back out of March just to try to keep it away from everything else. Who knows? But anyways, loved Resident Evil 2, one of my favorite games, probably my favorite game of this entire current generation, which is saying a lot. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do with this one, because as a lot of you know, Resident Evil 3 has Nemesis, which is this dude who chases you around with a rocket launcher, and he can run. And just seeing what they did with Mr. X in Resident Evil 2, I think they're going to come up with something really cool for how this guy works in this game. So yeah, really looking forward to it. Okay, and now we're really stretching it past March, but I should mention that in the middle of April we have Cyberpunk 2077 coming out, which is, you know, it's made by CD Projekt Red, the guys who made Witcher 3, and so this looks really cool because I think a lot of people like this theme more than the Witcher 3 theme. Maybe not, I don't know. But it looks cool to see what they're going to follow up The Witcher 3 with, because that game was huge. A lot of people love that game. Critically, it did really well. I actually don't like that game as much as most people do. I did still really enjoy it. It's probably one of the best examples of world building in a game. Which is saying a lot, because that takes a ton of work and effort. So they really did a great job with it, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do with Cyberpunk. All right, and that about does it. Be sure to mention any other games that are coming out in March that you can think of, because the games I've listed certainly aren't the only games. And then, you know, in May we've got Last of Us Part 2, which is huge. I'm a big fan of the first Last of Us, and I know a lot of you guys probably are too. So yeah, I'm looking forward to how that goes. But yeah, let me know what you think of all of these games, and if there's any games that you think should be added to the list. And with that, I will see ya in the next video.